If you track global geopolitics, there's one incident that really stands out as a clear line being crossed. I'm talking about the dramatic seizure of that Russian-flagged oil tanker way up in the high North Atlantic.
A huge story. And not a simple one either.
No, not at all. This isn't just a news headline about sanctions. It's a real-world collision. You have this high-stakes economic warfare on one side.
And the fundamental rules of the sea on the other?
Exactly. So our mission today is to do a deep dive here. We want to get into the specific facts around this tanker, the Marinera.
Which used to be called the Bella One, it's worth noting.
Right. We need to understand the nuts and bolts of the operation, unpack the really volatile legal battle it's kicked off, and then look at the strategic implications, because this could reshape how global economic pressure is enforced.
And the high-level facts, they really do frame a perfect storm here. This was not a quick stop. This was the end of a multi-week high-seas pursuit. U.S. assets were targeting oil shipments, linked to sanctioned Venezuelan and Russian interests, and it all ended with the seizure of the Marinera.
It really moves the whole sanctions battle out of the bank vaults.
And right onto the open ocean.
So let's start with the operation itself. I mean, a high seas interdiction, especially of a vessel tied to a major power like Russia. The mechanics have to be incredibly precise.
Oh, absolutely.
This doesn't sound like it was a sudden thing. It feels more like a highly coordinated, lengthy mission.
That's completely right. The coordination was immense. It spanned weeks, multiple agencies, multiple assets. The key factor for the U.S. was getting a warrant first from a U.S. federal court. That domestic legal document, that was their green light for what happened next, hundreds of miles from shore.
And who actually carried it out?
It was a combination of forces. You had the U.S. Coast Guard and Navy vessels doing the physical intercept, the boarding. But what's often missed in the headlines is the surveillance piece. There was critical support noted from UK intelligence, from their naval assets, which let them track this thing over a huge, huge area.
So it's this complex choreography, almost like they're trying to avoid a direct military fight, but still, assert force. And this whole seizure, it's part of a bigger U.S. initiative, right? Operation Southern Spear.
It is.
We hear that name, but what does it actually mean in operational terms?
Operation Southern Spear is basically the strategic framework. It's dedicated to actively intercepting vessels trading in sanctioned Russian or Venezuelan oil. Think of it as a sustained naval effort. It's meant to operationalize financial sanctions. It's an ongoing campaign, and the Marinera just became the highest profile target they've caught.
So if enforcement is the goal, the target was, perfectly chosen. The Marinera is a classic example of what experts are calling the shadow fleet.
A textbook example.
For someone trying to picture this network, what does this dark fleet, as it's sometimes called, what does it actually do to evade authorities?
Well, the tactics are clever. I mean, the whole fleet is designed for one thing: evasion. They're constantly changing names, like this ship going from Bella One to Marinera. They falsify shipping documents, and critically, they practice what's called dark activity. They turn off their automatic identification system, their AIS transponder.
Which is mandatory.
Mandatory for all large vessels. So they disappear. They vanish for a while, load their sanctioned cargo, and then pop back up with fake papers, hoping to just blend in.
That sounds incredibly expensive and difficult to track.
Yep.
Which I guess underscores why you need naval and intelligence assets like the UK's to even have a chance of catching them.
It does. And that's why this seizure is so important on a global scale. It's a signal. It says that just changing your ship's name or turning off a tracker isn't enough anymore. Europe and other allies are also ramping up their efforts. But this seizure, using military and Coast Guard assets, it's the clearest message yet that the commitment to sanctions is now backed by, kinetic power.
But doesn't this whole thing, Operation Southern Spear, start to look a bit like a naval blockade?
That's the tricky part.
Because if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it might be challenging this long-standing idea of freedom of navigation. Which brings us to the core legal fight.
And that question, is this a blockade or is it legitimate law enforcement? That is precisely the source of all the legal friction here. The U.S. government has a very specific sort of layered legal defense for what it did, and it really relies heavily on technicalities.
Okay, so lay out the U.S. position for us. What are the specific claims that gave them the confidence to board a Russian-flagged vessel in international waters?
Their argument has three interlocking points. First, the vessel itself was targeted under U.S. sanctions law. Simple enough. Second, and this is the most controversial part, they declared the vessel stateless at the time they intercepted it.
Oh.
And third, They argue that because it was violating U.S. law, specifically sanctioned statutes, the federal court warrant gave them the authority to seize it no matter where it was.
The stateless designation feels like the crucial pivot point. How can a vessel that is physically flying a Russian flag be simultaneously designated as stateless?
This is a deep, deep legal nugget. The U.S. isn't arguing that the ship literally lost its flag registry in the normal sense. Instead, the stateless designation is about its activities, illicit activities, fraud, evading sanctions, using fake insurance, hiding its ownership. U.S. domestic law has these mechanisms to treat a vessel as stateless when it's operating so far outside the bounds of legitimate commerce.
So for the U.S. legal system, a ship engaged in that much fraud is a
And it's operating without protection, regardless of the flag it's flying.
I can see why Moscow immediately condemned this. I mean, from their point of view, a Russian flag is a Russian flag, period. This is an act of aggression. What are they citing as the breach?
They immediately called it a breach of international maritime law. Full stop. They're relying on the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS. UNCLOS is the foundational treaty for all of this. And they're pointing to principles like Article 87, which guarantees freedom of the high seas, and Article 92.
And Article 92 says?
It says that vessels sail under the flag of one state only and are subject to its exclusive jurisdiction on the high seas. Exclusive.
So we have two completely competing legal universes. The U.S. is prioritizing enforcement of its domestic economic law to fight fraud.
Right.
And Russia is prioritizing the absolute freedom of a flagged vessel on the high seas. What does the broader international legal community think about this? Is there any precedent?
This is why analysts are calling the situation unsettled. There's just no clean consensus here. Traditional international law, like UNCLOS, it was written for a different world, a world of clear territorial disputes, classic naval warfare. It was not designed to handle non-kinetic economic warfare, like sanctions, being enforced by kinetic military assets in peacetime.
Right, the tools don't match the problem anymore.
Exactly. Legal scholars are debating whether the U.S. claim of jurisdiction based on financial crimes can create an exception to that exclusive flag rule. The consensus, if there is one, is that the legal basis for this kind of boarding in international waters without some broad multilateral mandate, it's shaky at best. It's very risky.
And that instability is exactly what you don't want in a foundational treaty.
Well,
If the U.S. can use its Coast Guard to enforce economic crimes, what stops, say, China from enforcing its own environmental laws against U.S. vessels in disputed international zones?
that's the fear. That's precisely it. The lack of a clear line means we're kind of entering a period where domestic law enforcement could fracture the entire system of high seas governance.
Okay, so we've established the operation was aggressive and the legal ground is, let's say, contested. Let's shift to the geopolitical fallout. How did Russia respond to this?
The rhetoric was severe and immediate. This incident adds just a serious amount of strain to the already terrible U.S.-Russia relationship.
Which is already under huge pressure because of Ukraine and sanctions.
Right. And the seizure of what they see as sovereign property, even if it's legally contested, is viewed in Moscow as a major escalation. And it's important to note the extremes this pushed some people to. Now, this isn't official Russian policy, but sources indicated that some lawmakers in Russia made extraordinarily aggressive statements.
How interesting.
I mean, invoking their nuclear doctrine in response to what they saw as an attack on national sovereignty. The sheer level of antagonism it generated tells you this was seen as much more than just a policing action.
Let's look at the strategic perspectives then. What's the clear, compelling argument for the U.S. and its allies to take such a high-risk action?
For supporters, the rationale is pretty straightforward: effectiveness and deterrence. This action shows that the financial sanctions on paper can and will be enforced physically. The shadow fleet is this massive loophole, right? It's a pressure valve for sanctioned regimes.
So you have to shut the valve.
You have to shut the valve. And that takes more than just banning banks. It requires physical intervention. It signals a willingness to use military assets to back up economic measures. It's the ultimate proof that sanctions have sharp physical teeth, and it's meant to deter other shadow operators.
Okay, that's the argument from strength. But what are the tangible strategic warnings coming from the critics? Because when you escalate enforcement, you invite escalation in return.
The primary risk is precedent and reciprocity. Critics are warning that this move sets an incredibly dangerous norm for naval interdictions on the high seas. If the U.S. can board a vessel flying a major powers flag to enforce a domestic financial law,
then other major powers get a reciprocal justification to do the same thing.
exactly. So tomorrow, They could target a vessel carrying, say, sensitive U.S. tech or allied goods under some domestic pretense of their own, and they'd point to the Marinera seizure as the reason they can do it.
That raises the chances of miscalculation and direct conflict exponentially.
It does. This action blurs the lines. It blurs the lines between economic sanctions, which are non-kinetic tools, and traditional military operations. By using naval power for law enforcement in international waters, you just elevate the risk of military confrontation over a simple cargo of oil.
It moves an economic conflict into the realm of a traditional security threat.
So what we're really witnessing here with the seizure of the Marinera is a profound moment of synthesis. It's a major escalation, no doubt about it. It's framed by the U.S. as necessary and legitimate law enforcement, to combat illicit trade, uphold financial integrity.
But internationally, it's widely seen by critics, including Russia, but also significant voices in the legal community, as a highly contested and potentially destabilizing use of force. It challenges the very idea of high seas freedom in peacetime. This is the moment where economic warfare really does spill over.
It spills over into the traditional security domain. For you, the listener, the key takeaway is really to recognize that duality. On one hand, the seizure was an effective way to punish a shadow economy.
That it came at a cost.
A huge cost. It came at the cost of challenging a foundational international treaty. We've sort of traded short-term enforcement success for long-term legal ambiguity.
And this incident, it's going to echo through diplomatic and military channels for years. It forces every maritime nation to look at its own vulnerabilities again. The provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. How effectively can the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention adapt to a world where great powers use their navies not for war, but for enforcing global economic law?
And that definition of a stateless vessel in this new era of financial warfare, that ambiguity is what future confrontations are going to exploit.